Ugh, what a night.
Have you ever watched Family Guy and wondered to yourself, wait a second, who can actually understand Stewie?
Am I talking to myself up there?
You're not alone, my friend. While it's clear that Brian, other children, and a few other characters always know what Stewie is talking about, things get a little more confusing when it comes to everyone else. In the world of Family Guy, anything goes. Giant chickens fight adult men. The Kool-Aid Man lives among us. Animals can talk and date human beings without raising eyebrows. And babies are secret geniuses with underground laboratories and British accents that seem to have come out of nowhere. But really, that last one really only applies to one baby in particular, Stewie Griffin.
Bing bong, hello!
We've known from the beginning Stewie isn't like every other baby out there, and that's what makes him so much fun to watch. If it were a show about a baby who just did normal baby stuff all day, we might not tune in quite as much. To watch him sleep and eat and poop and cry and repeat. But while we accept Stewie's genius, it has somewhat shockingly seemed to have stayed a secret from everyone in the family, except his best friend Brian. Even his ability to talk seems to fade in and out as needed, which leads us to wonder, why is it exactly that not everyone can understand Stewie? One totally fascinating theory might just have all the answers we're looking for. This question has clearly been on fans' minds for quite some time, and one in particular has come up with this seriously compelling idea. It goes like this: there is no clear answer, because the entire show is seen through Stewie's eyes, or how he interprets the world. Let's elaborate. The reason that the world of the show is so completely exaggerated and over the top is because it's all being filtered through the eyes of a baby, who sees things as bigger and more cartoonish, quite literally, than they are.
This is wonderful, Brian.
We get that this might seem like a bit of a reach, and it might even raise more questions, like how would Stewie see things happening to other characters when he's not in the room? And how could he possibly know all or even any of the constant pop culture references that the show makes in its famous cutaways? Well, sit back because we've got the answers for you. We'll start with Brian. We've long since accepted the fact that Brian walks and talks and lives like a human being would, and the fact that he's a dog really doesn't bother anyone. But what if he doesn't? If we go along with the theory that what we see is through Stewie's eyes, Brian does all of these human things because Stewie loves him and sees him as any other member of the family, just like kids do with their pets. If we were to step outside of Stewie's interpretation, we'd see the family talking to Brian not as an equal, but the way we talk to our pets. And we know Stewie is a little possessive of Brian, so when we see Brian going on dates and winding up in relationships with women that all seem to go awry, it's actually just Stewie projecting the jealousy he feels towards his family dog getting attention from anyone other than him. Not only does this theory explain how Brian exists the way he does, it also helps explain he and Stewie's numerous adventures. Brian is the Hobbes to Stewie's Calvin, if you catch our drift. Along with his bear Rupert, Stewie creates elaborate and danger-filled adventures for him and his best friend to go on together. Think about it. The time machine that Stewie has in his room is not only huge, totally out in the open for anyone to discover, but makes a ton of noise and light whenever activated. Not even counting the fact that Stewie is a baby and time travel has not been proven to exist yet, but how would no one in the house grow wise to what was going on if it wasn't all make-believe? Babies aren't usually awarded that much privacy, no matter how distracted their families are. We're not saying that Peter and Lois are the best parents ever, but come on. Someone might at the very least notice if their infant son and dog had completely disappeared for extended periods of time, wouldn't they? And speaking of Peter and Lois, this theory has some interesting stuff to say about their characters, as seen through Stewie's eyes as well. Peter is the most over-the-top characterization of the bumbling, beer-soaked suburban dad, like Homer Simpson plus Al Bundy times 1,000 with a bit of Fred Flintstone thrown in there for good measure. So much so that it's almost believable that he wouldn't notice that his baby is a time-traveling genius. Almost. But this theory argues that Peter isn't actually so exaggerated after all, that again, it's just the way that Stewie perceives him. It proposes that because Peter is at work all day, he comes home and does what most parents do with their babies: act silly and over the top in order to make them laugh. So what Stewie sees is the funny faces, crazy voices, and funny antics of a dad trying to entertain his son. And because that's what Stewie knows, this is how he assumes Peter is all the time, which is what we see. All those times that we wondered how Peter could afford things like the Petercopter was just him playing with Stewie, and Stewie's childlike childlike imagination, making it seem real. But Stewie's relationship with Lois is another thing entirely. We've known since day one that Stewie has it out for his mother.
Lois is a dead woman.
But after multiple attempts at ending her life, he has seemed to relax a bit about it in these later seasons. But when she's not totally off the rails, Lois is known for being strict and naggy, with her running gag being about how serious she is about grocery shopping. Well, this is all explained by the theory once again. Because Stewie spends all his time at home with her, she isn't the fun one the way Peter gets to be. Lois has to keep everything in order, feed him, change his diaper, and put him down for naps. All the things that children hate to do. So in his mind, Lois is out to ruin his life, fueling his totally over-the-top hatred of her and desire to take her out for good. And the reason that Lois can never seem to understand Stewie when other characters can is that she doesn't listen to him and ignores his cries. When babies cry and protest, we still make them eat and sleep and get their diapers changed because it's for their own good. And they need those things to, you know, live. We've also seen a lot of Lois being unhappy with her stay-at-home status lately.
Mummy! Mummy! Mama!
And her day drinking is definitely a little out of control. Now, while she might have a pretty serious problem, it might also be another case of the entire experience being exaggerated through Stewie's eyes. As for Meg and Chris, whose ability to understand Stewie does seem to fade in and out as the story requires, well, that's just sibling stuff. If you have siblings, you know that you can switch from feeling totally understood and completely ignored by them on a dime. And while Stewie is a baby, this still applies. So when Stewie feels understood by either his brother or sister, we the audience get the impression that they can hear him. And when he feels ignored, well, you get the point. But what about all of those pop culture references, the flashbacks, the cutaways, the movies and TV shows that Stewie couldn't possibly remember from decades before he was born? Well, the theory has some ideas about how to explain all of that, so don't you worry. First off, we know that Stewie spends a ton of time in front of the TV, just like the rest of the family. We see him sitting there on the couch, watching with the rest of them, and then on his own numerous times. So it's totally possible that he actually has seen tons of reruns of old TV shows, and older movies just from that alone. And we know that Peter is a huge fan of pop culture from his youth, so like any dad who wants to share that nostalgia with their kids, it makes a ton of sense that he would go out of his way to show Stewie, Meg, and Chris his favorite movies and TV, that he then references all the time. Oh, so you're telling us that your dad didn't walk around the house shouting 1.21 gigawatts and then make you watch all 3 Back to the Futures when you were 13 so you'd get his dad jokes too? We know he did, so don't even try to deny it, Marty. And we know you took that Farmer's Almanac too. What were we saying? Oh yeah. So Stewie has been exposed to all of Peter's favorite movies and TV, but because he's a baby, he hasn't quite figured out the difference between TV and reality. It takes years for children to be able to make the distinction between what is real and what isn't, just like their very real relationships with imaginary friends and their stuffed animals. And so to Stewie, those episodes feel like they happened for real, which is why the cutaways are so detailed, almost like he experienced them in real life. And what about the things that happen during the day out of the house that Stewie couldn't possibly know about? They can be explained by the fact that when the family comes home at the end of the day, they tell each other what happened throughout it. Peter talks about his day at the brewery and his time at the Drunken Clam with Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire. Chris and Meg talk about what happened at school, and, well, Lois spent the day with Stewie anyway, so he already knows what went on there. And then all of those stories get exaggerated by his childlike mind and imagination, and what we see on the show is the result. There is even evidence to support this theory in the show itself, specifically in the episode Back to the Pilot. In the episode, Stewie and Brian travel back to the pilot in order to retrieve a tennis ball that Brian buried in the backyard. Of course, shenanigans ensue and things go awry, but Stewie does mention that the pilot is his earliest memory, which is exactly the kind of hint that helps support this theory. Clearly, all the other characters are older than Stewie, with decades worth of their own experiences and memories. So why would the first episode of the show also coincide with Stewie's first memory if it weren't all from his perspective? It could have started earlier, but the entirety of Family Guy as we know it only kicks off as Stewie is able to recall things happening around him. The theory also helps to explain why Stewie has the mysterious British accent that he is so well known for.
I'm British Stewie. I don't hear anything different.
He's from Rhode Island, and yet sounds completely different from everyone else in the family. In the episode Send in Stewie, he's sent to a child psychologist to deal with a playground incident. What follows is an entire episode where Stewie first attacks his therapist, then pours his heart out to him, before eventually letting him die of a heart attack. But before that happens, Stewie admits that he knows that his British accent isn't real, that it's just an affectation put on to distinguish himself from a family that he doesn't quite connect with. But it took until season 16 to reveal that information, because Stewie himself controls how we see his world. And after what happened to his therapist, who appears to understand him because it is his job to communicate with infants and children, by the way, we might be better off letting it stay that way. Who knew that Family Guy could still surprise us after all these years? What did you think of this theory? Do you believe it or not so much? What do you think the show would be like from another family member's perspective? Let us know down below, and we hope you had fun watching.